we are going to get to, quite simply, one of the greatest freeze frames we've ever had on this show.
Ooh, that's a big sell.
Nah, tell me.
It's
a good one. It is, man.
Yeah.
I'll take it back
No
a little bit. I'll take it back a little bit because she actually makes a cute little noise where she's like, and then she keeps on going. I really like it. We are talking a little bit about how Winston, the bridesmaid, is taking all the pressure, all the focus off the bride, being Mr. Luxon. Someone's got a Photoshop of that, Mr. Luxon in a bride's dress. And Christopher, now I kind of feel on some level like Christopher Hipkins should kind of keep his mouth shut, because he's lost and he needs to kind of go away for a little while and yada yada yada. But in saying that, he made, like someone said, to Luxon today, well, Christopher Hipkins said this, and Luxon sort of rightfully so said, why would I care what Christopher Hipkins said? Why would I be taking advice from him? And like, I don't agree with Luxon, but I kind of get the point that you've just decimated this party. You've got a massive win over them, maybe a little bit of, I understand where he's going. But anyway, Christopher Hipkins came out today talking to Breakfast, and I've taken it back so you can get the little noise as well, from Anna Burns Francis, and talked about there's actually a technicality here where maybe Winston Peters is actually breaking the law with all his conversations.
Shocking.
With all his conversations and his criticisms of the public broadcasters. Let's have a listen.
The moment.
I suspect you're referring to some of the comments that we've seen publicly around Winston Peters attacking the freedom of the press and making false claims about the independence of public broadcasters?
Absolutely. I mean, Christopher Luxon really needs to rein Winston Peters in. This is the Deputy Prime Minister in the government making some baseless, false allegations. They're pretty outrageous allegations, actually, about the media being bought off. That's incredibly damaging to the public integrity of New Zealand's fourth estate. Bearing in mind that the Public Interest Journalism Fund was actually set up while Winston Peters was Deputy Prime Minister in the previous government, and he supported it at that point. So he's all over the show. But actually, there's also a potential that Winston Peters is breaking the law here, because his comments around TVNZ and RNZ, effectively giving them public instruction on what they should be doing, almost certainly falls foul of the laws that are very clear that ministers shouldn't interfere in their editorial decisions.
So obviously, an opposition party is going to get in every chance they can and niggle. But if that's true and accurate, then it's just another slight against Christopher Luxon going, I think Nicola Willis literally says in one of these clips, oh, that's just Winston being Winston. Like, I think she literally, boys will be boys, that kind of thing. And if it is a technical law breaking, for those leaders to be taking that path, it's even worse. We've got about 60 more seconds with him. I'll just keep going, actually.
Yep.
How much of a concern then is it that these comments have been going for a number of days now?
I think it's very concerning that Winston Peters is making these comments. I think it's even more concerning that our new Prime Minister doesn't think that they're sufficiently serious to warrant any intervention on his part. In fact, if Christopher Luxon is going to show leadership as Prime Minister, he should be stamping down on these straight away. They're wrong, they're baseless, they're false, and they're actually very dangerous to the integrity of our democratic system.
The problem is his comments now have brought in, have rippled out into a wider effect. The reaction from the public servant, Andrew Shaw, calling Peters part of the worst gang of thugs. Was that an appropriate comment for a public servant to make?
No, it's certainly not someone who's on the board of New Zealand On Air who allocated that funding, and he's resigned, and I think that was the right decision for him to have taken. So no, he shouldn't have made those comments given the role that he held. I have to say I have some sympathy for the comments. That doesn't mean that they were acceptable for him to make those given the role that he holds or has held.
Sorry, I cut him a bit short, didn't I? So that's what Leader of the Opposition said. I've got a few clips here of his actual coalition partners and what they're saying about it. If there's nothing, you can jump in now if you want to, but if there's nothing to jump in with yet, I'll play each of these. Mr. Luxon's from his stand-up, and then I've got one from Seymour and one from Willis. They're all a bit shorter, though. What are your thoughts?
Look, I think I see what you're saying, that maybe Chippy should have just given them enough rope and stayed out of it. I'm going to disagree with that. I think we need to see a fight from him that we didn't see until very late in the pre-election campaign. I think he needs to stomp on Luxon's nuts every opportunity that he gets. But he's got to come correct. He's got to come loaded for bear every time. He has to point out every piece of chaos that comes out of this Cerberus cabinet room that they've got. Every time that the Prime Minister is not in control of something, every time a minister is not across what they should be across, every time they don't answer a question from the media. Like I saw Willis today, sort of almost preemptively blaming what's coming on the fact that Labor have spent everything and they've let rats and mice in the budget and all of this sort of shit. And then
excuses already.
Yeah, like what? Oh, I'm not going to go into it. No.
But listen,
you
on that,
said it, you bring it out.
No, but on that point as well, Grant Robinson responded to that by, if she doesn't know how to read pre-food, then that's her own problem. Because it wasn't anything in there. And look, let me just say, I actually don't disagree with you. I guess what I'm saying, and I'm not suggesting that he should sit back and shut up, but what I'm saying is, okay, so maybe this is what I'm saying. He might be the wrong person to do it. Because on some level to the public, remember, and I'm approaching this from what the public's going to do, he's lost a lot of credibility being smashed so badly. He's the leader. He's the captain of the All Blacks that's just lost in a significant way, and they now have to rebuild. So I don't disagree. Look, if my last comments were misconstrued, I don't disagree that he should just sit there and suck it up. All I'm saying is that he won't get taken very seriously for a while yet, and I wonder how to approach that. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is how he rebuilds his brand.
Maybe
this is how he gets back in the fight. Or maybe what you're saying is that he needs a bulldog.
Yeah.
He needs someone to fucking pull at the chain and go, let me at him, boss. It could be Robinson. I'm sure Robinson can cut them in half.
All right. Well, let's go on. This is a little bit longer. This is a couple of minutes, this clip, but this is his first post-cabinet press conference. And of course, all of the questions were about Winston Peters. Let's have a listen to what was being said by Mr. Luxon about Mr. Peters.
By now, you would have seen comments that Winston Peters has made over the last couple of days, and once that you're swearing in, and then yesterday, sitting right next to you around the cabinet, around media being bribed by a $55 million fund. Is that, what's your thinking around what he said? Is that something you agree with? Have you talked to him specifically about these comments?
Well, look, it's not the way I would describe it, but I actually also don't support the fund either, as do many New Zealanders. They don't think it was a good idea.
See, this is this line. Many New Zealanders don't support it. And this is what I covered off at the start of the show, that why don't they support it? Because they've been fed bogus information from the likes of right-wing think tanks and on some level, the National Party, ACT and New Zealand First. So they're going full circle to pull those seeds now that they've planted to go, well, the public have spoken and they don't like it. Well, why don't they like it?
Many of us don't, and I would be one of those people that didn't think it was a good idea. What I'd just say to you, though, is that we are now in a coalition government. We have three parties in this government. There will be different personalities. There will be different ways of expressing things. It may not be the way that I would express everything all the time, but it's important that everyone understands that, because actually what we are united behind is making sure we sort out the economy, sort out law and order, make sure we deliver better public services. So yes, we're going to say things in different ways as different leaders and as different members of that team in a coalition government, and that's fine. That's acceptable.
So have you had any conversations with him? Have you had any conversations with him about potentially reining in the language that he's used, and then specifically about his comments about TVNZ and RNZ and their use?
So think about this. If this was any other minister, if there was a National Party minister, do you think Luxon would just go, it's fine, whatever he wants to do? And this is the thing that people are talking about. He's going to lose control of that room. Maybe he has done already, because even though you're in a ACT party or New Zealand First party, you are still one of the Prime Minister's ministers.
You're the government.
Yeah, and he's basically cucking again right here. I know I've used that word a lot about Christopher Luxon in the last week or so, but he basically cucks again here, where he basically goes, you watch.
Use of Tereo, essentially coming close to breaching the cabinet manual there, according to Chris Hipkins. Have you had any sort of conversation with him about this?
Well, no disrespect, but I'm not taking any lectures from Chris Hipkins. I mean, I haven't actually heard what he said because I've been kind of focused on sort of sorting the government out. But what I'd say to you is he wasn't giving direction with those remarks, and I think people would admit that was the case. But what I'd say to you is, look.
Just a word of warning, he still doesn't know Winston. I would never, Mr. Luxon, try and tell New Zealand what Mr. Peters would happily do or not do, because he's likely to do the opposite. Like if the media go to Winston and say, well, your prime minister says you'll happily retract that, and Winston might just be going,
no.
you know, so I'm just saying, before you offer any opinion on what you know Winston will or won't do, I would just check in with the shall we call him it's like this is the version of what all those right wingers in America think about how, you know, it's actually Obama pulling Biden's strings. You do kind of have, in fact, there's a cartoonist, I'm sure it will come out, with Winston Peters as the puppet master and the prime minister being under it, saying, I'm the prime minister. It's actually sort of what's happening.
The reality is, Winston Peters and I talk many times a day, and we'll continue to do so.
We'll just stay on this for a second.
Yep.
Do you find what Winston Peters said acceptable?
Well, it's not the way that I would have expressed it, but I
You'll be surprised to know he doesn't answer the question.
understand the frustration with the fund, as many New Zealanders do as well.
As Prime Minister,
Sorry, Mike.
you said this as Prime Minister.
What specifically about the fund frustrates you?
There you go.
Well, I think, you know, and genuinely,
Specifics.
you know, there's a number of New Zealanders that actually up and down this country don't think it is.
No, Mr. Luxon. The question was, what specifically you not like about the fund?
Understand the frustration with the fund, as many New Zealanders do as well.
As Prime Minister,
Sorry, Mike.
you said this as Prime Minister.
What specifically about the fund frustrates you?
You.
Well, I think, you know, and genuinely, you know, there's a number of New Zealanders that actually up and down this country don't think it is a good idea that fund
He's
was
not
actually the way
listening.
that it was.
Yes, he
There was
is.
different
He's just not
criteria that
answering.
was put to actually using those funds. We have a difference of opinion about that, and there's lots of people with different views around that. I just don't think it was a good idea and a good program.
Why specifically was it not a good idea?
Yeah.
You talk about criteria. What criteria? Can you kind of give us?
Well, for the very reason that it actually leads to perceptions of bias,
There you
rightly or wrongly. I just say to you, you know, that's the perception. Whether that's real or not doesn't really matter. That's what the perception it creates or can create.
So he has just set himself a yardstick that if something has a perception of not being, you know, good to go, then that's, if something with a perception of conflict or a perception of bad, then that's bad. That's the yardstick that he just laid for his own government. Of course, they won't stand by it, but that's what he's just said. He said the perception is not good. So when they start, you know, tutoing with the rental agencies and that kind of stuff and making it better for landlords, the perception to me of that is they're feathering their own nest. But I'm sure they'll be okay because that perception in their eyes will be wrong. Shall we?
So here's my perceptions. They're in bed with the tobacco companies. They're in bed with the real estate companies. You got Stephen Joyce with his own fucking luxury development in Central Otago. You have Paula Bennett in bed with the real estate guys. You have the tobacco companies everywhere. Your Minister of Health is an investor in a private medical centre.
Yeah.
Like, you're up to your eyeballs in rental properties. You've got so many people from so many different vested interests that have donated so much money to you guys, and they want a return on their investment. There's your perceived conflict of interest.
Yep.
And look, his whole excuse of like, oh, you know, like he's from a different party and we're a coalition, and sometimes your coalition partners say something slightly differently from how you would. Bitch, you have been lashing Labour for the last 2 years for everything that Te Pāti Māori said, and they weren't even part of the government, and the Greens said as well. Oh, you Labour should pull the Greens into the heel. Well, now it's your turn.
Yep. And this is actually a time where he should pull them in because he is part of government. As you're saying, Greens and Māori Party actually weren't. Let's click over onto TV3 from this morning because Nicola Willis was also asked about Winston. So I wanted to show you guys what his coalition partners are talking about. And I'm sorry, I forget the name of the interviewer. It's my bad. Someone in the chat will tell me. States a very interesting question, and it's basically saying, was he being truthful? And the reason she uses this very specific line of questioning is that's what they have to swear to. So let's have a listen to what Nicola Willis had to say about Winston this morning.
Look, I think that Winston's being Winston. He's not the only politician in Parliament who's been critical of the media. That's just something that's par for the course, really. I think there have been critics of the Public Interest Journalism Fund, the $55 million from across our society, and I think Winston's just been reflecting that.
Do you think he's been truthful and accurate in his claims?
Yeah, that's the phrase, truthful and accurate, because that's what they swear to. Was he being truthful and accurate? And her response is?
I think there's a bit of hyperbole in there, but that's Winston being Winston.
So you wouldn't say that it's not correct that the government has bribed media?
Oh, look, I think it's a turn of phrase, and I think some people are taking it very literally. I think what's at issue is a policy which Winston Peters disagrees with, which I think David Seymour has said that he disagrees with, that many people disagree with, that involved a $55 million fund for journalists, and which created a perception from some that was the government influencing journalists.
So tick, perception, tick, many people are saying. But truthful and honest, wouldn't answer that. Wouldn't answer that at all. So that's what she had to say. And I've got one more. And this is old Rimmer on News Talk ZB. I'll play this and then we can have a bit of a chat about it, shall we? So this is David Seymour on News Talk ZB talking to Heather Duplessis-Allen.
How do you feel about Winston stealing the show, though?
Well, it depends on your view. I suspect that will be some people's view, apparently yours, but not everybody's. Just make the comments about what he said. The Public Interest Journalism Fund was very silly policy. Probably the worst thing about it was that whether or not you believe it's true, for a lot of other people, it created the perception that the media had been, I guess, distorted by public money and the conditions that came with it. And that alone is why we've always opposed the Public Interest Journalism Fund. I just make the point that even Labor think.
Just be clear on what he said. That alone is why ACT opposed it. So that alone was many people say and perception. So now David Seymour has set up a yardstick that things that have a perception of a conflict of interest should be opposed, because that's just what he said about this. Because he said that alone was the reason ACT opposed this.
Figured that out and stopped it, and it was actually gone before the government even changed.
Was the media distorted by it?
I personally don't believe that they were. I think there's a lot of frustration with media right around.
So he doesn't think there was bias. But the perception of bias is the reason they opposed it. So he doesn't think there was anything wrong. But because there was a perception of something wrong, that alone was the reason that ACT opposed it. Now, he is getting kickback from the cookers today. I've seen it on Twitter, because he didn't say, yes, it was biased. He said, Seymour said, no, I don't think so. And on Twitter today, all over the place, there's like, he sold out, he's done this, he's done that, purely because he didn't say that it is biased. Now, when you get down with the dogs, Mr. Seymour, you get fleas. It's the same as all these people. If you don't stay 100% on side with the conspiracists, if you deviate by 5%, then you are the enemy, and you are now the enemy to these people that needed you to say there was bias. This has got about 30 seconds, Jerry. Do you want to say anything, or shall I play it?
No, I'll wrap up at the end.
Okay.
Around the world. But I always just make the point that $55 million over 2 years in a $1 billion industry, the idea that all the journalists in New Zealand were corrupted by 2% of revenue, for me, doesn't pass the sniff test. But it certainly has created a widespread perception. I've heard it many, many times. And I think Winston Peters is reflecting what no doubt many people have said to him as they have to me.
Yeah.
Perception. Many people think what the many people have said to us, and they're all singing from the same song sheet. So what's happened is they've had the PR team figure out a way to try and deal with this. They've sent it out to all of them, and all three parties, well, no, that's not true, actually, because Winston's doing whatever the fuck he wants. The other two parties are having to run behind Winston and go and have their talking points so as to not embarrass Winston, because they probably already know that Winston's about 3 minutes away at any stage of his life from going scorched earth on the whole thing. So he is in charge, and they are the cucks. Chewy.
The reason that he's hearing it so much is because of the people that talk to him. And like these people might have been on parliamentary lawn previously, but it's clear that they've got a direct line inside the fucking house now. Like, we often wonder if Seymour's got some principles, and there you go. He said he said the accurate thing, that there is no way that a smaller sum as $55 million is going to influence $1 billion industry to move the needle at all. Accurate.
Yeah.
He said an accurate thing, but then he goes and wipes it out and goes, it doesn't matter because people think this anyway. No, the nutters do. And it stayed in nutter land until the Deputy Prime Minister dragged it kicking and screaming into the front rooms of everybody watching. Like, it could have stayed on the parliamentary lawn and it didn't. These guys need to have a spine. They've won the election. They're safe for 3 years. They can distance themselves from these utter
are they?
cunts.
Are they though?
Because
if Winston,
no.
I've said several times this week, that they're in for the next 3 years, assuming this coalition stays together. No, I'm not suggesting it won't, but I wonder if Winston's going to keep doing this to basically be going, okay, young fella, you might be the prime minister, but guess who runs the show? Because without me, you got nothing. Because to be honest, David Seymour is a bit of a lapdog. He's got some quite horrible views, but he's a bit kind of mealy-mouthed and a bit kind of, oh, yes, okay, Prime Minister. You know what I mean? Whereas Winston's just like, fuck you, bitches. I'll do what I want when I want. I don't care what the agreement is. I don't care what we've signed. I am obviously exaggerating slightly for effect, but you know what I mean. I think that he wants to, like, I think I wrote I made a bunch of clips today, and one of them was something like Winston Peters literally gets his dick and balls out and slaps it on the table in front of Christopher Luxon, because that's kind of what he did in the when he basically had a crack at the media in front of Luxon yesterday. He just kind of went, just remember, shunk, how much and you owe me.
Fucking do it again. Yeah, it's. I mean, these guys saying that there's a perception, it's just playing to it. It is just going to make the job of journalists even harder. It is just giving oxygen to people that do not deserve it.
Yep.
Oh, it's going to be a long 3 years, man.